Hey, everybody, good afternoon and welcome. This is Anthony D'Ambrosio from Supply Chain Solutions, and you are listening to the Ship Show Series podcast, the show that gives you the inside angle on all things related to supply chain, logistics, and beyond. Today is March 13th, 2024, and on this week's podcast, we will focus on Supply Chain Solutions' new alliance with Avison Young, who provides superior inventory management solutions for our clients in the real estate arena. And the title for this week's show is Strategic Partnerships, Strategic Locations, a Game Changing Combo. But before I introduce our special guest, I would first like to tell you a little bit about Avison Young. So, Avison Young is built on the belief that commercial real estate is not just about the buildings and the square footage and the occupancies. At its best, it's about spaces and places that improve lives and help businesses thrive for the employees, citizens, and communities that make the impact matter. They strive to be real estate at its best, helping people be more productive, prosperous, and positive. And that's just what they do for Supply Chain Solutions and our clients. Now, this week, we are proud to have one of their very best. So please join me in welcoming Senior Associate from Avison Young, Matt Carroll, to the show. Matt, welcome.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it, guys. It's great to be on here. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, it's our pleasure. But first, I just want to tell our listeners a little bit about Matt, if I may. So, Matt is a driven leader with 15 years of international business experience in logistics and supply chain. He's multilingual, speaks fluently in Spanish and German. He's a graduate of Purdue University, where he played NCAA basketball, was a four-time academic All Big Ten honoree, the recipient of the Distinguished Scholar Athlete Award for Outstanding Academic Achievements, and the Ward Lambert Academic Award. He works well with all teams, focusing on positive results and coordinating critical processes to ensure success. And I can tell you, folks, that is definitely Matt's calling card. But without further delay, today is the day, everyone. So please join me in welcoming back my Ship Show co-host back from paternity leave, the incomparable Jason Brand. And Jason, as I would normally say, what's happening?
Oh, man. Okay. Well, Anthony, thank you for that. Thank you. And I am sleeping. That was my big concern. Was I going to do the next show with like 48 hours plus no sleep and just like paint under my eyes to make sure people didn't know I was holding it together? But okay, we'll cover this week by week. You'll hear about the little baby, in little bits. I want to get Matt talking here. We got a lot we want to cover today. But before we dive in, Matt, I want you to talk about yourself. So we think this guy is the most incredible asset, and I kind of want you to explain why we think you are the secret weapon in the industrial real estate arena. And the picture I really want you to paint for us is what it feels like working in your past on both sides of the equation, the sales equation, that is.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, guys. And I would say this, coming from a team environment, like you mentioned, playing basketball, you realize that I can't get anything done without a good team that supports everything I do. So it's not just about me individually, but collectively. I just got off a phone call, actually, a Teams call with a lot of brokers. I think there was like 50, 60 of us on nationally from Avison Young. And so, you realize that it's a collective team that helps, carry things across the finish line. But no, I appreciate you guys having me on. I've definitely had a unique background where I've had a background both in supply chain logistics for about 15 years and now in industrial real estate. And it's given me a unique perspective of kind of what happens globally, the things that affect, the supply chain, but also then affect industrial real estate, which is what we're talking about, the partnership that we have here. And it's one of the reasons why I connected so well with Les, your CEO, initially, was because He saw the background that I had in supply chain and logistics on a global scale. I used to manage warehouses in China, Europe, Australia, Canada, and the U.S., and was involved in all kinds of aspects, whether it be ocean freight, whether it be the warehouse itself and dealing with 3PLs, such as, supply chain solutions, and just, trucking, LTL, small parcel, FTL, you name it, inventory management, of course, WMS systems. So to be able to understand what affects the tenants or the people that occupy those spaces, and then to understand on a global scale what happens geopolitically and otherwise, and the pressures that are put onto the people developing the real estate and the tenants that occupy those spaces, the business owners, and why spaces, when you go beyond these different metrics that we use, when you look at things such as interest rates and things of that nature, we're in an election year, which is of course going to affect things. But when you get beyond those things and look at the outside forces, Russia, Ukraine, oil prices, all those different things that are affecting how we run our economy and where things are sourced from, and China and how that's moving towards Mexico. I know we're going to talk about that as well. But all those different things affect and inform what we do with industrial real estate, which has been a huge plus for dealing with customers as yourself and helping each other out to find solutions.
Matt, that's amazing. And Jay, if you don't mind, if I just
dive on in.
Follow-up question. So, Matt, we know that Avison Young integrates a strong team of consulting specialists like yourself to ensure the right strategy is developed and implemented for each of the clients that you partner with. Can you tell us and explain or speak to it a little bit? What are some of those strategies and methodologies that you use to help make clients make better informed decisions? Just to name a couple things like, workplace intelligence and location strategy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think absolutely. I think it comes down to whether you're dealing with someone who is more local or regional versus someone who's on a national level, right? I'll give you a recent example. We were talking with a client that is actually multinational, they're a growing 3PL. And initially, because we have resources in offices on a global scale, we were helping them initially in London with our group there, and helping them find possibilities or options and opportunities rather in places like Spain and France, the UK, and other parts of Europe. But then also being able to help them in the United States as well. And so it just depends on who you're talking with. A local tenant, owner occupier here in, let's say, Indianapolis, where I'm located, is going to look at things differently than someone like I just mentioned. So when you're looking at someone who's more local, it becomes a different kind of, you're looking at strategic places in our submarkets here, understanding, what rents look like in different parts of the actual Indianapolis area, and trying to find what works best strategically for where their customer base is at, their labor, and then also looking at the rent growth that exists in those different submarkets to place them in the right spot, right? And sometimes that's driven by them. They might tell you exactly where they want to be in those different submarkets, and you execute accordingly. But when you're dealing with something that's more multi-market, which is where Avison Young really can come in and play, a great part in this partnership, like with you guys, for example, is, we have a great, strong consulting arm to what we do that goes beyond the brokerage community that we have and the brokers that we have in-house. And they all kind of work together, right? One of the big advantages of our company is we've pumped in over $80 million into this system that we have, this technology that allows us to find off-market opportunities for land and all kinds of other options, whether it be, it's just an amazing platform that we use for all kinds of clients. So there's different data points that we can pull from and different resources that we have to be able to make an informed decision that go into what you're talking about, which is center of gravity studies, right? You look at what port should I be coming in, whether it be west or the east, should I be coming now in the south, in the south, which do you have these growing ports right now? You look at Charleston and Houston, how those ports are growing. In fact, we're going to be talking about Laredo here in a second, but Laredo has become, in previous months, at one point was the number one port in the country. and we'll talk about the reasons why that's happening. So you look at different things like that, different pressure points that are informing the decisions that these companies are using to make that best decision of where to be. If you're an Amazon, for example, you want more warehouses and more locations to be able to be closer to your end customer. The last mile, for example, in addition to your large distribution centers. But that's not always what every company wants. When you do these gravity studies, typically what happens is your outbound freight is typically, in addition to your labor, the largest expense you'll have. And so these studies will push you to have more warehouses because you'll lessen the amount of outbound freight, right? But at the end of the day, I may not want to have more warehouses because the amount of inventory I'll have to carry, the complexity of bringing that product in from, whether it be China or now northern Mexico, and how that complexity plays into all this, and the inbound freight that goes into that whole complexity of where I'm sourcing products from and the cost that's involved to do that. And that's what we were talking about yesterday, about what we're going to talk about today, the optionality versus optimality, and how we are viewing how supply chain is changing from the optimality to the optionality, right? And so optimality meaning I'm going to reduce costs, I'm going to find the most efficient way of doing things, where now you're going to try to find the optionality, which is giving you options to mitigate against the risks that exist globally. What's going on in the Panama Canal, for example, or what just happened with Russia and Ukraine. You can't plan for these things, and so you have to have options available to you. And so all those factors play into all this. When you look at COVID and the way that the container rates went up through the roof. Oh yeah. We were looking at prices, I think, in that all in door to door, $3,500, let's say, dollars from Southeast Asia over to the United States. They went up to, in some cases, $20,000, $30,000 per container. Yep. How that all affected supply chain, and in turn the way people were planning inventory, which then in turn affected industrial real estate. So all those things play a factor. And so understanding those things when you're advising clients and customers in terms of where they should be and why is a huge thing that plays a factor in their decision-making process.
Yeah. And Matt, just one last thing, Jay, before we go back to you, just a comment on what Matt said. So this is why we have such a similar culture with Avison Young, because, they are always trying to find a better way and deliver results for their clients, just like we do at Supply Chain Solutions. And, it's not just about those spaces and places. They're not just finding a space for somebody. Some of the methodologies they use for their inventory rationalization and warehouse design process and portfolio optimization and real estate consulting and change management and program management and relocation management are just things that we sort of all do in lockstep, sort of. So I think that's just why it's such a win-win for us to partner with Avison Young. So I just wanted to say it's a similar culture, and we just love what they do. I mean, they are a first-class organization with exceptional people like Matt. But Jason, why don't we send it back to you, because I know you have a couple of other interesting questions and comments we want to touch on.
Oh yeah, for sure. I want to kind of second what you're saying too. First of all, I just want to comment on this, the optimality versus optionality. I love that. I'm going to use that again. Yep. I think the market actually, when we saw the pandemic and we came out of the pandemic, right, and we kind of saw freight rates go back to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, normalcy. Yep. I think a lot of people, were feeling like, okay, the worst is behind us. But the truth is, and like you described, Matt, quite frankly, these disruptions happen all the time. And we're still in quite a divisive period where these big changes are happening. And I totally agree with you, optimality versus optionality. I mean, we need to have that ability for our customers. And, if you're a client and you don't have the options, you just find yourself exposed to too much risk nowadays. So, and I kind of want to talk about this as well, because the cool thing about Avison Young, and this is totally on what you were saying, Anthony, is they're much more than an industrial real estate broker. They're really a soup to nuts organization. So we talked yesterday about how when Matt's kind of got access, the keys to the castle of the client he's working with, he can really start to design the solution around their operation much better. It's not just looking at listings, looking at prices, saying, okay, this city should be better. It's much deeper than that. And that's the reason why the partnership just kind of gelled so well with us, because our goal is really to have a complete look at your supply chain and design the whole thing together with everything else in mind. That's the same thing that Avison Young is doing. So when we are setting up a warehouse, we found ourselves, we can find something great, but Avison Young can make it twice as good. And that's obviously a abstract figure, but they've been able to take our solutions when it comes to inventory management and just kick it to a whole new gear. And that's really going to affect our clients. And we're really excited about this. Now, I kind of dipped in a little bit, and Matt, this doesn't have to be a big answer, but it totally can as well. I want to know just what I was saying. When you kind of get the keys to that castle, when you're let into your client's organization, what are some of the things that really stand out when you're trying to, marry up that right location or that right strategy with that customer? Are there a few things that kind of float to the surface?
Well, again, I think it depends on the client. Typically, a couple things here, right? We often think about, it's kind of like when I graduated from college and I joined the real world, so to speak. All these organizations and companies have it all figured out, and then you join these companies and you realize they don't. And so you work with these different companies and you realize that you're not necessarily you're coming alongside of them to either affirm and confirm some of the things that they were trying to research and figure out themselves, or answer questions that they really couldn't answer themselves in the first place, right? So, and it depends what those questions are, and that's where we can come alongside them and help them with that. So an example would be, like we talked about earlier, these center of gravity studies and understanding where labor is, for example, and being able to look at where not only labor is currently, but where is labor going to be? Where we expected the growth to happen in these different cities or these parts of the country, and where we've seen that migrating towards, so that we can then plan. If you're, let's say, a developer, help you plan in terms of where the path of progress is, right? And if let's say you're a 3PL and you're trying to figure out where should I be next, it's about understanding where your competition is, right? Where are all the other 3PLs that I'm competing directly with? Do I want to be near them, or do I want to be further away from them? Do I, it almost becomes a client by client scenario. Mm-hmm. And then, like you mentioned, that is where we can add a different layer or another layer, so that it becomes a bigger study, a broader study, than just, hey, rents are at this, here's some available spaces, which, everyone who is in brokerage has those available, tools to them. So it really comes into, or down to, some people don't want to go down that path, and others that want to strategically look at their growth from not just where should I be now, but how do I look at this from a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year strategy, so that I don't have to keep moving. Is expensive. And so you want to make sure that you are in the correct location. I mean, when you think about a 3PL, for example, you're talking about racking, you're talking about equipment, you're talking about the flow of how you set up a building. You're talking about setting up WMS systems in those buildings, attracting labor, retaining that labor, all of which is very difficult to do. And if you have to move, 5 years after you moved into a particular space, that's extremely expensive, not only because of what I just mentioned, but just moving product inventory from one spot to another we did a move once over in Europe where I think it took us 100 trucks, 100 transfers from one warehouse to the other one to actually move all of our inventory. And so that's expensive. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars just in freight to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't even include the damage that can happen when you're moving product around and you're trying to re-rack things and all that kind of stuff. So it gets to be complex. So you want to make sure you're a strategic partner in those types of scenarios with these clients to make sure that they understand what it means to move to another spot and how long they want to be there, what their long-term strategy is, and helping them make that decision. Yeah, that's such a good point. And I'm glad you mentioned that inventory. We moved a location, and oh my gosh, and not to mention the stress on the organization too. That's right. It's a lot of resources. Oh yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about U.S.-Mexico trade. I want to specifically talk about Laredo, and I want to focus on the crossings. I want to look at the trucking market in particular. So
Since the pandemic, specifically going back to 2020, the number of cross-border northbound trucks has increased by roughly 27%. So Ryder, Prologis, both of them have stated that they're going to start construction, or they already have started construction on these new and huge inventory management facilities. And Anthony and I have talked about this. Also, we just acquired an organization, G4, that focuses on the cross-border market in general. And the thing we always hear about Laredo is that it's too crowded and it's too expensive. Now, I kind of want you to talk about it. Like, dissect it from your point of view. What's your opinion on Laredo? Do you feel like a build or lease strategy makes sense?
So, as luck would have it, right? I'm actually working with a group down there, a landowner that has, let's call it, it's a little bit more than 3,000 acres down there. And one of the things that is interesting about Laredo that we've been discussing is that Laredo is an interesting play right now, because historically it's been almost like a flyover state, where people will come into Mexico and go through Laredo. It's not really been historically a spot where people go to stick or stay for distribution, as a spot where they, put things there and then go out, and distribute from there. It's typically something that they bypass. So right now it's booming. There are smaller amounts of landowners there. So it's, you have landowners that own 3,000 acres, so to speak. And it's not a bunch of small individual landowners. Typically it's larger landowners with a lot of land, but not a lot of landowners, if that makes sense. So anyway, it's an interesting area because we just mentioned a little bit ago. It's become the number one port of entry, into the United States, specifically because people are going into Laredo and then going down into the northern part of Mexico for manufacturing, right? And so it's interesting to look at this and how it's shifting. Because you mentioned this, the pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic a second ago. When you look at supply chain and the functionality of all of it, people are reevaluating their supply chains right now for onshoring, reshoring, all those things, right? And so friendshoring, which is another new word there too. But everyone's reevaluating whether or not I want to manufacture everything in China or in Asia, whether it be Vietnam or elsewhere, and bring it over to the northern part of Mexico, which is going to take time, by the way. We talked about this the other day, but when you look at everything, if you want to manufacture something in northern part of Mexico, it does not completely disassociate you from China. When you look at what's been built over a couple generations now of procurement in that part of Asia, to say that I want to all of a sudden just manufacture something in northern Mexico, you may still be dependent on China for the parts that go into the final assembly of what it is that you're manufacturing. So you're not completely getting away from being dependent on China necessarily, at least not overnight, right? But what's happening right now is you're seeing this infrastructure really develop in the northern part of Mexico and therefore in Laredo as well, okay? And so especially with this rail that's coming, online here with the merger that happened. So we talked about that, but it's this idea, this visual of the northern part of Mexico being the root system, right? And the tree trunk that will kind of come out from that to go from that northern part of Mexico all the way into Canada. And if you can imagine the branches coming out of that being where we believe the path of progress will be next for industrial real estate along that corridor. But that northern part of Mexico and then that part of Laredo is kind of that next booming area, and we're seeing it now. So you have these developers who want to be in those areas, and it would just be interesting to see how it plays out, because a lot of people right now are trying to understand the story of Laredo and why it makes sense. And that's some of the pushback I've gotten from some developers as to why should I be in Laredo, and you're explaining it to them. And so it takes a little bit of a vision and forward thinking as to understanding, why they should be there as Mexico continues to grow.
Well, that's tremendous feedback there, Matt. What else can you tell us about Avison Young and some of the other interesting projects you've done and things of that nature that you might want to share with us?
Well, I think that when you look at Avison Young, it just depends on what your strategy is. But as a company, I can tell you that, I was on another call with a younger group of brokers yesterday, all over the country, Inland Empire, you name it. And what jumps out at me is just the how hungry everyone is to do well, to succeed. And that sounds kind of cliche, but there's a lot of entrepreneurial kind of mentality that everyone has at Avison Young, whether it be because of the technology we have or how we leverage that and the creative ideas of how we're interacting with different clients. It's the feedback that I continue to get from the people that we deal with. That is, we're not just showing them availability reports and things of that nature, which a lot of people can do. Of course, it's part of what we do. It's part of my job, but it goes beyond that. Part of what we do is the technical side, which is understanding, the comps and availabilities and, all those different things. But then it goes into, relationships and, how we handle those and the strategic partnerships that we have and how we look at our jobs more as like consultants versus you being a number and just trying to be transactional. So I think that really is something that Avison Young brings to the table that to me has jumped out as I've been here.
My camera decided to just reset randomly. I don't know what that was about. I was like, what is happening here? Anyway,
I'm scared. Yeah.
It's got to happen, right? I don't know. Maybe my son pulled out a cord from the wall. I'm not sure. But let's see here. I got one final question because we are running close on time. Plenty of time to answer. But you mentioned the rail merger. Anthony and I reported on that on this show when it first happened. We were jumping for joy. It's an exciting change to the market, a really exciting change. And I can only imagine for you guys that it's feeling the same way because there's got to be total new areas that have kind of been accessed. Or just run me through kind of your thoughts about that. Some areas in the future you're excited about or just some big changes in general that you're focused on because of that rail merger.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that so we often get the question from developers, especially, right? And this goes back to who are you dealing with? Who's across the table from you? Developers are very interested in understanding what's next, right? Where should I go next? It's typically a question being asked, and it's our job as brokers to be able to provide them with an answer that is substantiated by data and other things that we are being informed by, and this being one of them. When we looked at the pandemic era, when you look at Amazon, they actually doubled their footprint during the pandemic era. Not a lot of people know that, but it actually doubled their square footage and how many warehouses they had because of the rise of e-commerce, right? And their last mile and everything, and how our behavior as consumers changed during that time frame, and it changed overnight. And so the rise of automation happened during that time. Development that we thought would take a decade plus, maybe in some cases 15 to 20 years, happened very rapidly during the pandemic era because it had to, in terms of how they were servicing us as the consumer, right? And so you no longer, think about how our expectations changed during that time. Yeah. I was used to getting something within a week, maybe two, and it went from, if I don't get it within a day or two, maybe three, I'm angry,
Cancel the order.
So all of a sudden you have this doubling of warehouse space. And what I'm getting at is the pandemic era informed that growth, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's going to inform the next growth pattern that we see? This is one of those things. We obviously the onshore and reshoring and everything that's going on in Mexico is one of those, next paths of progress, if you will. I believe the shifting of port activity is another. When you look at Charleston and what's going on there, and how much money they are actually investing into that area, and how because of what happened in the pandemic era with the West Coast, the LA Long Beach ports, and the famous scenes of 100 ships being parked outside of that port waiting to actually get unloaded. And how that shifted everyone's strategy of, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the unions and everything, the complexities that are happening on that side of the country. They started reevaluating the strategies of, even if it's more expensive or even if it takes longer in some cases, I will go to Houston, I'll go to Charleston. New York has gotten busier. So, and then we talked about Laredo, obviously, for other reasons. So there's all these different components that are informing what's next, but this is one of them, right? Which is the rail. And so when you look at that, like I mentioned earlier, it's not a straight line, like we'd like to think is like a tree trunk. But if you can imagine that rail going, south to north from Mexico up to Canada, we believe that that next path of progress is those branches coming out of that and into those cities, they're going to be connected to that rail. And that's a great place to look at, where that's going to be next in terms of that growth pattern, and how you can, use those parts of the country to then, distribute out of. I mean, when you look at Indianapolis, for example, we have all kinds of major highways coming in and out of Indianapolis, which is one of the reasons, a big reason actually, in addition to the fact that we have the second largest FedEx hub in the world here. But when you think about Chicago, which is only a couple hours away to the north of here, that highway, the I-65 corridor that connects us, is, I believe, the second busiest corridor in our country. So you have things being railed over and trucked over into Chicago and then down into Indianapolis. But that's why we're a popular market for industrial, is because you can distribute out of here and be in most locations, west, east coast, or south, within a couple of days. And so I believe that when you look at the rail and the way that's going to function, that there will be cities that will be popping out of that will also have that same functionality as we're seeing in Indianapolis.
Oof.
That's interesting because I have a real close friend, and this is not a pushback, that kind of works in that arena with the rail shippers, and she goes on to tell me that mergers between rail shippers are not a good thing. Between rails, it can be complicated and it could limit options. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. So I thought that was an interesting comment. But
and it's not going to happen overnight, right? So that's the thing, is that it's going to take a while. And so it's not one of those things where the merger happened and all of a sudden, boom, we have this infrastructure in place and this, all this stuff happening and popping up everywhere in terms of the path of progress. But it is something to keep an eye on as those things develop. And so, no, but of course, it's going to take years for that to actually develop into what they hope it will. I know everyone in our field is excited about what that looks like, and in your field as well, because of the ease of how transportation, will function. So it's a double-edged sword in terms of what you just mentioned, because it's kind of like the ports, right? They're as good as they function when labor is willing to be efficient and all those other things. And so it's complicated. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everyone, I want a big thank you to Matt Carroll for being on here today, and Avison Young. Make sure you like him on LinkedIn. Make sure you follow him as well. Also, reach out to us and tell us what you like. Tell us what you learned. Tell us what you want to know more about. Really appreciate it, Matt. Awesome insight. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, guys. Love being on. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Matt, it's a real pleasure. Make it a great day. And everyone, God bless America. Take care now.
Bye, guys.
Have a great one. Take care. Bye.